Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Chicanery. It is, as per usual, it is your host, Danny, but unlike usual, it is just Danny. I'll stop referring to myself in the third person, but yeah, it's just me this week. My wonderful co-host is otherwise indisposed at the moment, and at any rate, this is going to be a slightly different episode from usual anyway. This is going to serve as an update episode of sorts. The F1 news cycle has been relentlessly churning away here these last couple weeks, and I wanted to get just get an update out on certainly some of the talking points and some more recent developments, sort of in that time frame. Of course, we have had the car reveals. Since that time, all 10 teams have unveiled their cars. In fact, preseason testing is actually taking place as I record this episode. And then just some updates on the stuff that we did in the F1 news cycle update from a few weeks ago. But first, a word from our sponsor, Home Field Apparel. Home Field is venturing into the thrilling world of racing with the Hendrick Motorsports collection, which drops Friday, February 23rd at 10 a.m. Eastern, 7 a.m. Pacific. Based out of Indianapolis, you likely already know Home Field for their high-quality, officially licensed collegiate apparel, and you probably also know that they have more than 180 schools on their roster, so there's more than a little something for everyone. I mean, seriously, they even have my local D2 school, Wayne State University. Given Home Field's storied legacy in throwback college apparel and their commitment to quality, moving to racing apparel seemed like the logical next step, and that's reaffirmed in their meticulous approach when designing the Hendrick Motorsport collection. Iconic logos, legendary drivers, and unforgettable moments, this collection is a celebration of the golden era of NASCAR. Here at Victory Lane Vibes, we're super excited to get our hands on what Home Field has cooked up. Their collegiate wear is second to none, and in concert with some of the most legendary names in NASCAR history and one of the most legendary teams in NASCAR's history, the Hendrick Motorsports collection is sure to be a banger. To learn more, visit www.homefieldapparel.com. Their online storefront is easy to navigate and very convenient, making it that much easier for you to proudly represent your favorite drivers and relive NASCAR's glory days this season. And be sure to use promo code VLV24 for 15% off at checkout on your first order. Again, the Hendrick Motorsport collection launches on February 23rd at 10 a.m. Eastern. Thanks again to Home Field Apparel for supporting this podcast. But alrighty, let's get into it. So first of all, is like I said, it was car debut season. Certainly some interesting things to kind of be gleaned from all of this. The overwhelming feeling was, lots and lots of carbon. It's worth noting that the teams have been working really, really hard to make it down to the minimum weight requirements these last couple years, and so we're seeing more extensive use of bare carbon as a way to strip off, precious grams and try and find a little bit of performance. Perhaps unsurprisingly, that provoked some consternation from the broader F1 observing crowd, boring liveries and, so on and so forth. I personally didn't really feel like it was that bad or that big a deal. F1 is engineering led first. We are so far removed from, frankly, the goofy stuff of the 90s that it feels purely like apples and bananas, if I'm being perfectly honest. But even then, still the Aston Martin livery is gorgeous. The new podium green color that they're using for this season to tie in with the launch of the Vantage GT3 and just the road car Vantage is a fabulous color. The new Visa, Cash App, Red Bull, let me find $20 between the sofa cushions livery. I mean, it's very Toro Rosso, which, truth be told, only serves to further confuse the branding of this team. Clearly, the second team in the Red Bull racing structure as a whole is undergoing some upheaval. To almost 2 years on from the passing of Dietrich Mateschitz. And so it'll be curious to see quite what happens with that. But the livery is gorgeous. We're seeing some silver back on the Mercedes this year. Still predominantly black, but silver with the sort of Petronas slash Mercedes EQ teal slash blue is kind of fun. It actually reminds me a lot of the Formula E, the Mercedes, the EQ Vesta, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I thought that was a great looking car, and I honestly think that this is more fun. Now, and of course, we got a surprise release with livery debut rather, not too long after Christmas with the McLaren livery, and then we got a proper car launch, and so on and so forth. Red Bull is kind of same as always, but the biggest things is, like I said, we've got a running of free practice now. Not free practice, rather preseason testing. I guess functionally they're not that different, but that's besides the point. We've got a day of running, and it looks like the RB20 is again effectively the Death Star of the field. It's worth noting that these times should all kind of be taken with a pinch of salt. We'll see in particular the next couple of days really what the sort of competitive pecking order is likely to be. Mercedes has got the funky new wing, funky new front wing rather. Ironically, Red Bull is going to a side pod concept that's remarkably similar to what Mercedes tried at the start of the regulations change. So I don't know. Like I said, we really haven't established the true pecking order competitively. But at least, between the Red Bull second team and particularly the Ferrari with the introduction of some of that white and yellow, we do have some very pretty race cars on the grid. But speaking of Ferrari, there's, I guess, more news on Lewis's move. A couple of things. It was reported, actually, yesterday by some sources fairly close to the Mercedes team that apparently in 2022, Lewis and his camp noticed a subtle but noticeable shift towards Russell's side of the garage. Now, it's worth noting that Mercedes has never explicitly laid out number one and number two. It's worth noting that Valtteri kind of got beaten into submission and became sort of a de facto number two driver. But the contracts are structured as such that both drivers is, equal number one status within the team. But apparently it didn't go down super well, given that Lewis had literally just gotten out of a slugfest of a title fight the year before that was then poorly officiated to the point where he was the losing party. And then have Mercedes seemingly erroneously put their eggs in Russell's basket, and seems to have left a sour taste in the Hamilton camp's collective mouths, as it were. But beyond that, it has been very heavily reported that Mercedes really does seem to be ready to move on from the Lewis-Hamilton era. It has also been reported that apparently Lewis was trying to negotiate for a longer-term contract, something like 3 or 4 years. I guess it would have effectively probably been his final contract, given that would put him at 43, 44 years old when it was up for renewal. But it seems like Mercedes is making room for junior Formula prodigy Andrea Kimi Antonelli, which is a absolutely fabulous name, by the way. Yeah, so apparently he was only offered a 1+1, so a 1 year guaranteed with a potential additional year to be picked up by Mercedes should they wish. The idea, from everything that has been reported, the idea was that Antonelli does F2 this year, Williams next year, and then Mercedes in 2026. Now, of course, because Lewis is flying the coupe, it sounds like this prospective timeline has been pushed forward a year, and this is where it makes the 2025 driver market particularly exceptionally messy, is because of the unknown at that Mercedes seat. Does Carlos go? It sounds like Perez's time at Red Bull could be coming to an end. Does he go? Alonso is in a contract year. He could potentially go if he feels like he wants to continue to deal with the rigors of modern Formula One. So we don't really know. Like I said, there's just a lot of, we alluded to it in the initial episode about the F1 driver market, but 2025 is going to be nuts. And the fact that Lewis is the first domino to fall in some ways only intensifies that frenzy, given that there are a lot of good prospective options as a Lewis replacement, but there aren't necessarily any that will potentially be plug and play in quite the same way that, or I guess plug and play in the way that it can replace Lewis, rather. So it's just, yeah, it's going to be ridiculous and messy, and certainly if you're a fan of Formula One, it will be barrels upon barrels of fun. But they are just, with the potential musical drivers musical chairs, pardon me. Who knows quite what we're going to end up. But the funny thing is that certainly if the latter bit of reporting is true, it makes it abundantly clear that Lewis is not ready to throw in the towel yet. Everybody figured that a retirement announcement was effectively imminent, with everybody figuring he was going to retire out of Mercedes, and then he's gone and signed at least a couple-year deal with Ferrari. I don't know if it's, he just simply feels like he can keep racing, I guess just because he wants to, or if he's doing it because he's still feeling a bit sour about 2021. I mean, who knows? But Lewis is hungry. Mans is hungry. And I am genuinely excited to see what happens, what goes on with Ferrari later. But in less positive news, but in almost as seismic, Red Bull Racing team boss Christian Horner is under investigation for alleged poor behavior against, or towards rather, a female employee of the team. It is not being reported very heavily what exactly it is, and if you've paid attention again to the reporting on this topic, quite the nature has shifted in a few times. It was alleged to be sexual harassment, and then it shifted to be something managerial, and now it's sounding like it could be coercive. And I guess, well, just to be blunt, it can be all of those things simultaneously. One does not necessarily beget the other. But it's, whatever it is, the allegations, it's yucky. So much so that it was reported that before undergoing a rigorous internal investigation, as it has been deemed by some external sources, that Christian was asked to just resign and hang his head, but be able to leave in some level of grace, which is generally not a good sign. Again, it's worth noting that Red Bull is being exceedingly tight-lipped, to the point where even perpetual chatterbox Helmut Marko has learned the art of shutting the hell up and is letting the investigation sort of get on with it. It was theorized that this might be done before the Red Bull car launch, the RB20 launch. Obviously, that did not happen. In fact, Christian Horner, rather, took center stage for that. So clearly they're working through it. Red Bull is trying very, very hard to pretend that nothing's really happening, which, well, I guess sort of the annals of history and the benefit of hindsight will truly be able to uncover as to whether or not that was the right decision. But it's not good. And in fact, actually, today it was reported by the Dutch arm of Viaplay that it seems like a firing may be imminent. Again, given how tight-lipped Red Bull has been, I wouldn't bet money on that, but it's been not great. But Curiously, and this is just a bit of fun speculation in what is an otherwise horrendous story, if true, is that there was renewed chatter about Adrian Newey's contract with the team. And there's basically, he has an escape clause that says if basically if Horner goes, he can bail. And that's curious because Fred Vasseur at Ferrari is clearly assembling something of a super team a la Jean at the just before the turn of the millennium. And Adrian has expressed time upon time upon time again that he would love to work with Lewis. So, assuming Fred basically scraps the current design and technical team, and also in doing so sort of design or scraps those structures, there could, in theory, be an opening. I mean, it wouldn't be as early as 2026, given the mandatory gardening leaves, as they call them, to keep key personnel like Newey from taking that information elsewhere. But it's just, again, it's a fun bit of what if and what is an otherwise, frankly, disgusting and horrible story. So again, there may be maybe on my socials or on the Victory Lane Vibes socials at VL Vibes podcast on every platform. Maybe there will be an update should this conclude here in a somewhat relevant time frame. But for now, that's just about all we have on the Christian Horner saga. But moving on, sort of the future of I guess Team Steak, Kick Steak, Sauber gambling company. And it is interesting because, of course, we know that the whole Kick/Steak branding it's but a temporary measure until Audi comes in and takes over in 2026. But this marriage is already, or maybe marriage of convenience. I don't know. Think of that. Insert analogies here as you may, but yeah, it's not. We're already not off to a great start. So, of course, being a gambling house, there are lots of regulatory filings and, lots of bureaucratic red tape to wade through. And apparently, Stake has just said, nah, and just decided not to. Apparently, Stake not actually have or did not submit the sufficient required paperwork to be able to operate in Switzerland, which is actually Sauber's home country. And so much so that the Swiss government has effectively called them on their nonsense. Again, because the bureaucratic wranglings take a considerable amount of time, there isn't a ton of information, but it is suggested that this could potentially throw the Stake Sauber tie-up into disarray depending on quite how this goes federally. And that's curious because the knock-on effect, the butterfly effect, that could take place as a result of this is huge. The big thing with these 2 years of Stake was sort of Sauber getting its house right for the Audi takeover. It is no secret that last year in the big slip in the constructors' standings was deflating for the team. And it's also enough that apparently it's given even Audi a little bit of pause about going through and doing this. And so to basically have 2 years worth of money just evaporate, or a year worth of money in development, depending on how long this takes, evaporate as a direct consequence of a crypto/gambling house being shady, would be an atrocious look, and it would potentially be enough for the Audi board, or I guess sort of broadly the Volkswagen Group board, to terminate the partnership, terminate the deal. And that could be catastrophic for the long-term health of Sauber, which has been sort of spotty at best really since the team's inception in the 90s. So, it's messy, and it really only goes to further drive home the point that, for as much as the FOM statement talking about Andretti not bringing anything to the table of Formula One being potentially detrimental to the series, this is so much worse. Um, I mean, this would be farcical on a level that we have not seen from a team since MasterCard Lola, Andrea Moda. And I guess if you want to talk about financial crimes, then the Onyx Moneytron team of the late 80s at the hands of Jean-Pierre Van Rossum. And, that was when Formula One was a true horse, dog and pony show. So I don't know. Like I said, it only further serves to make the FOM rejection of Andretti look even more stupid given this. But we'll have to see what kind of happens going forward. And speaking of absolutely farcical events, the Singapore Grand Prix, apparently there were some corruption charges. The former transportation minister, S. Iswaran, I probably butchered the hell out of that, and for any Singaporeans that may be listening, I am very, very sorry. But point is that he was charged on 27 counts of corruption. There was an investigation that started in late 2022, early 2023. He effectively resigned, hoping that he might be able to lose a little bit of the heat as a direct result of that. And, well, clearly that's not worked. It's worth noting that he's pled not guilty to all charges. But the result of this has led Singapore government to sort of review the terms of the Formula One race. It's also worth noting that sort of Singaporean hotelier, Ong Beng Seng, again, I probably should have looked this up before I started recording, but I am a consummate professional here at Chicanery, and I will do nothing of the sort. Thank you very much. But yeah, he's also swept up in the investigation, apparently price fixing of hotel rates and what have you for the race. Now, curiously, the Singapore government is made it abundantly clear that they, at the very least, want to run out the existing contract for the Singapore Grand Prix, which runs up until 2028, I do believe. However, this is not a good look, and it could potentially lead to some reviews, and I could absolutely see, depending on how this investigation shakes out, there being sort of shaken faith in sort of the Singapore Grand Prix, both from FOM and just from race organizers and promoters as a whole. Because it's worth noting that in theory, these arrests are just the tip of the iceberg, and we could see some further promoters and people who are near the Singapore Grand Prix get swept up in all of this. So it's not entirely clear sort of what's going on there. But we'll just have to see what happens. But it would not surprise me if the Singapore Grand Prix fell off the calendar in, say, 2026 or even 2025, citing this corruption probe. And to sort of round things all off, since this is where we're at right now, is indeed F1 preseason testing. So, again, we had some running. Well, like I said, alluded to at the top of the show, we don't have a real view of the competitive order, but it is worth noting that the Red Bull, the RB20, is currently top of the table, running something like near enough 1.5 seconds quicker than the second fastest car, which I do believe, as of my final check, was Lando Norris in the new Mercedes, or, good lord, new McLaren, rather. And I do believe Verstappen set that time on the C3 compound, so not running the softest tire available. So like I said, lots of variables, lots of unknowns. And it's also worth noting that when Max made that final run, track conditions had improved quite significantly. So we, in theory, should see some times tumble. It is important to stress, or interesting to stress. It's an interesting tidbit to note that Lando actually was very briefly top of the table in day one of testing earlier this morning, rather, which I guess would have been sort of midday in Bahrain. But so there could be something vaguely interesting going on with this year's competitive order, but we will truly just have to wait and see what happens. But with that, thank you very much for listening to this, again, sort of an update video and a solo show. I don't know, could potentially do more of these in the future depending on how folks like them, but this is here to satisfy Brian, particularly, for sort of jumping up and down at the quotes softballs that the F1 news cycle has been throwing at Chicanery here this last little bit. So didn't want to leave you hanging, but at any rate, thank you so much for listening, folks. Until next time.